All down. All silent. Going. Go. So congratulations.
Welcome to the Current Market Insights podcast, brought to you by Harris Partners Real Estate. Each episode, we chat with real estate author and industry leader Peter O'Malley to discuss the current property market conditions and provide insights to assist you on your property journey.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Current Market Insights. I'm your host, Ciaran O'Brien, and with me is Mr. Peter O'Malley. Peter.
Ciaran, great to see you.
Great to see you, buddy. I want to talk tonight about a topic that I think is interesting for our listeners and hopefully will be of some benefit. There's been some news recently of some goings-on in property that is kind of the focus of what we'll talk about tonight. But I really want to start the episode by taking our listeners through purchasing and exchanging contracts on a home. I would really love if you could break down for us the different ways that people can exchange on a property, how those ways do differ, what it means if you are the buyer or the seller, what elements are involved. And once we've gone through all of that, we can have a bit of a look at what's been happening in the media that really can help tie together why these things are important and why learning about how to exchange property is a really pivotal part of being in the property market.
Yeah, look, it's a really big topic, this one, Ciaran, and we may not get through all of it in this podcast, such is the depth. But every buyer seems to have a different strategy when it comes to securing a property. And once upon a time, I don't know if you realise this, but real estate agents in New South Wales were not allowed to exchange properties. They had to go to the lawyers.
Yep.
But thankfully now real estate agents can exchange contracts. And I do mean that genuinely, thankfully, because it has made the system more efficient.
Yep.
But it comes with additional risk. So everyone knows that real estate agents must pass offers on to the vendor.
Yep.
We have in our agency agreements that the vendors give us permission to refuse to accept a verbal offer.
Mm-hmm.
But if we didn't have that in writing from the vendor, an offer can be verbal, written, by way of a letter, text message. A lot of the younger ones now deem, actually I had someone in their 70s text me an offer this week, and I was like, yeah, won't be playing with that.
Yeah.
Text message, email is the most common form of a non-binding attempt at making an offer in a buyer's mind. Signing a contract with a cooling off period, which some people are familiar with, which is less common in inner city Sydney, but more common in the suburbs. Buying under auction conditions, which we can talk about, and exchanging contracts with a 66W, which effectively makes it an unconditional contract.
So there's, just for our listeners, I'm going to split those into two columns there, because the first ones you mentioned, as you rightfully said, are non-binding. That's the letter, that's the verbal, that's the, hey, Peter, I'll give you $20 million for your $1 million apartment. That's a non-binding offer. Even if I texted that, that's a non-binding offer. And they're a way for the buyer to communicate, hey, this is kind of where I stand, or I'm feeling the waters, or I'm whatever I'm doing, but I'm not committing to purchase on any of those. The others, as you said, where there is a contract involved, whether there be a cooling off period, which is a standard amount of time in New South Wales, but can be negotiated differently.
It can be negotiated longer. It can't be negotiated shorter.
Correct. Yeah. Or, as you say, with a Section 66W form, which I guess for the clarification for our listeners that don't know, is basically a legal document that waives your right to have a cooling off period. And it needs to be signed by a lawyer or your lawyer acting on your behalf, your conveyancer, and it effectively waives that cooling off period that we mentioned in the other form. So for simplicity, there is a non-binding and then the binding options for people to purchase.
Yeah, so when I first came into real estate, which was longer than I care to remember ago, the notion of real estate agents handling the exchange process was only in its infancy then.
Yep.
And technically, for a solicitor to issue a 66W to their client, they really should have a face-to-face meeting and explain the full terms and conditions of that contract with their client. And in the early days, when we would insist or need a 66W from a purchaser, they'd have to go and sit in their lawyer's office and have the Riot Act read to them and the contract explained to them before the lawyer would hand the 66W over, which is why in those days we preferred cooling off periods, because the statutory cooling off period in New South Wales is 5 business days. So we'd rather just put the clock on the lawyer and say you got 5 business days to sort this out.
Yeah.
Whereas if you said to the buyer at that point in time, go and get a 66W, they might not get into their lawyer's office for a week and a half.
Yeah.
Fast forward to 2026 and lawyers and conveyancers who also came into the industry about the same time that agents could handle exchange. Paul Denny was conveyancer 001 in New South Wales.
There you go. Still going strong.
The
firm is, yeah.
Paul's retired. But at that point in time, with the where we are now, I should say, lawyers and conveyancers seem to spit 66Ws out like they're jelly beans.
Well, and quite often preemptively.
That's right.
They'll just have one ready in case you need it.
That's right. And you do wonder in every instance if the buyer understands the full ramifications that they're taking if they exchange contracts. And we'll talk about this news article that you alluded to over in Wallara, and a well-known Australian celebrity in another instance did exchange unconditionally and thought they could just step out of the contract when it didn't suit them. And it's like, that's not how this works. If you exchange contracts with a 66W, you're on the hook.
Oh, look, absolutely. And I've experienced this with friends asking me for advice when looking to purchase. And I've explained to them, if you make an offer with this document, that's it. That's like handing over cash on a Facebook marketplace exchange. The cash is gone. You've got the item whether you like it or not. There's no option to back out at that point.
No, exactly right. And we've spoken about this before, so we won't go over it again. But now with digital signatures, the whole system's getting looser.
Oh, 100%.
Where you just, you're emailing 500-page contracts to people and just saying, put your digital signature on the front, and I've got your 66W from your lawyer and you're away. The buyer, in the majority of cases, the buyer wouldn't have a clue what's on those 500 pages.
No, and do you know what really bothers me about this? And I think we talked about this when we were, quite some time ago, when we were talking about digital signatures. What really bothers me about this space is they're designed, and it's not the fault of the agent, it's not the fault of the lawyer. It's a feature or a quirk of the systems that collate the signatures, that they are designed that you put a position where you need a signature, and when they open the file, the client, whatever it might be, and they click the button that says start, it skips 450 pages or whatever it needs to and goes directly to the signature. And you don't, it's like terms and conditions on a piece of software or a video game or at the start of a film, right? No one's sitting there and watching all of that or reading it. And it does. It makes it very challenging, as opposed to, I know when I've personally exchanged contracts for you in the office, I read through hundreds of pages, looking for similarities, differences. Exchanging contracts is a physical process still, where you go through and you make sure that they're identical.
Yeah.
I probably read those contracts far more than anyone buying ever has.
Yeah, well, look, I've heard marketers use this phrase when it comes to the digital signatures and the whole transaction thing, whether it be Amazon, using your Visa card, Apple Pay, or signing a contract to buy a house. They're looking to make the user experience frictionless.
Yeah.
And when I heard that phrase, I thought, that's a good phrase. That's a good selling phrase, because that explains exactly what is happening in our societies. Everything has become so frictionless that people end up buying $10.6 million properties in Wallara and seem oblivious to the fact that they're completely on the hook for the damages incurred by that vendor if it all goes wrong.
And don't forget, it's only frictionless on the way in. When you sign the contract, that's frictionless. It's incredibly the process has a lot of friction to get out the other side. If you decide that you don't want, Apple or gym membership's probably the best current example of high friction exchanges. They're always in the media, right?
Hey, cancelling the kids' Roblox account. Give that one a go on the weekend.
Yeah, exactly right. So they're designed to be easy on the way in, incredibly challenging on the way out. Before we jump to the article, and I know that it is a super interesting topic, I just want, if you can, just very simply explain, other than the cooling off period and the different documentation, are there any other, standard differences between a contract signed with a cooling off period versus a 66W in terms of things like deposit, in terms of process? Is there anything different that typically happens as just a general rule, more for information than anything else?
We must point out that the the cooling off period is designed to be equal weighting in terms of risk, and they've done that by putting a legislated amount in that if a purchaser pulls out of the cooling off period before the end of the cooling off period, they must forfeit 0.25%, so 0.25% of the agreed purchase price to the vendor as compensation.
Yep.
So this is not like the old days of the video store where you walk around and put 3 movies under your wing and try and find a better movie before you hand them all back. If you take a property off the market in the Sydney real estate market, you'll pay for that privilege. Where people who are buying and real estate agents get in a tangle is the real estate agent is trying to turn their verbal or written, non-binding written offer into a contract offer, and the buyer is seeing the real estate agent as high pressure.
Yep.
And what the agent is trying to do on behalf of the buyer is stop the buyer from getting gazumped in many instances. And this is why I think buyers agents have exploded on the scene, because emotional home buyers out in the marketplace on the weekend were misinterpreting the intent of selling agents who were just saying, because I can tell you as a real estate agent, if you, with a nice young first home buyer couple, if you agree terms for them to buy an apartment for $1,155,000 and then someone who offered 1.1 starts offering $5,000 more until it's obvious that they're the new high offer and you've got to take their offer to the vendor, and then the couple say, well, $1,155,000 is as much as we've got, and you have to gazump them and sell it to someone else for $1,160,000. People think real estate agents enjoy that.
Yeah.
That's an absolute horrible experience as a real estate agent. So if a campaign has run its course and the best and highest offer is $1,155,000, and the agent's saying, if you put that offer on a contract, I'll get it exchanged for you, and all the first home buyer sees is this person's trying to take my rights away from me, they're trying to close me, they're high pressure. But it's just uncanny in the real estate world how often a buyer will come past an existing buyer, you know this, you're shaking your head in agreement, and pip them at the post by a nominal amount, an amount that doesn't mean much to the vendor, but absolutely ruins the month for our aspirational first home buyers.
Mate, I am shaking my head because I can remember vividly so many occasions where I would be even on the way to exchange a property and you'd get an email or a phone call saying, hey, we're back in all of a sudden. Or alternatively, you'd go and exchange on the way back to the office, you'd get the phone call, hey, and obviously at that point it's done, you've closed the deal. But it's amazing how, it's Murphy's Law, right? People will find
just on that point, what people will find interesting here, sorry to cut him, but you do raise a great fork in the road. As a real estate agent, you must pass any offer onto the vendor before exchange.
Yeah.
So let's say you do have an offer of $1,155,000 and the underbidder rings back out of the blue, which happens all the time to agents, and says, don't exchange contracts, we want to put another offer in, even though we told you 3 hours ago we're out at 112.
Yeah.
We now want to put in $1,163,000.
Yeah.
And I want you to take that to the vendor. If that contract's not exchanged, even though you may have said to the buyer at $1,155,000, the owner's accepted your offer, I'm going to see them now to exchange contracts, you now have to, by law, as a real estate agent, say, I've told the purchasers that you've agreed to the offer of $1,155,000, but since I've told them, someone else has offered $1,163,000, the decision's back with you.
Yeah.
Now, some vendors in that circumstance will say, my word is my bond, give it to the couple at $1,155,000, and the other will say $8,000 tax-free, that's going to take me, that's going to, that's
a holiday or whatever,
yeah,
whatever it might be, right?
Whatever it might be, that means something to me, and it's law of the jungle, and no one did me any favours when I was buying, so go with the higher offer, and you've got to go back as a real estate agent and crush that person's day. However, if you did exchange contracts at $1,155,000 as a real estate agent and driving back to the office, the buyer rang up and said, I know we told you and we sent you an email saying our best offer was $1,120, but we're now prepared to go to $1,163,000. You can say, sorry, it's already exchanged, and you don't have to tell the vendor.
Yeah.
You don't have to tell the vendor if a higher offer dribbles in or a higher intention from a buyer dribbles in after exchange. But before exchange, you are on the hook if you don't tell the vendor that you've received the higher offer, even if it breaks your heart to gazump the other party.
Oh, and just to give some, certainty or comfort to our listeners, as an agent, it is a horrible feeling gazumping someone. Like I have never enjoyed that conversation where out of the blue you've had a higher offer, because I've always felt I'm a very honourable operator. And if I say, look, it's all been agreed, I'm going to go do it, and then something does come out of the blue, it really is a horrible, horrible scenario, because you do feel like you're letting all the parties down. But I will say there's been plenty of occasions, as you mentioned, where the vendors feel for that scenario and say, no, like I've already agreed and I'll hold firm. Yeah. And they're happy to agree to the original terms, which, always makes our job so much easier in many ways.
Yeah, look, sometimes just with timings and fate, we get ourselves in those pickle. What we like to do as best we can is go back to the new underbidder and say, look, we know we told you 1,155,000 buys it. Someone's found extra money, grandma's tipped in, and they've moved up in price to be 1,163,000. The vendor, at the best the vendor can do for you tonight is offer you the property at 1,163,000, and if you can pay that price, I'm with them now. They'll exchange with you.
Yep.
Because that's what the other party's offered. If you can't exchange at that price, my instructions are to go with the other offer. Not the news you wanted to hear, not the news I want to deliver. That's the scenario. What do you want to do? As you get more experience as a real estate agent, one thing you never do is tell someone that they've purchased a property before they've actually exchanged. So you say, look, as it stands, the owner is prepared to exchange for 1,155,000. Your offer is only on an email, so it's incumbent on you to get an unconditional contract in front of the vendor and exchanged, and you need to know that if another higher offer does come in, I'm at liberty to pass it on to the vendor, and then it's up to the vendor whether they stick with the agreement in place with you or they chase the higher price.
Yeah, which, most of the time goes as planned, but not always. I want to pivot then to kind of wrap up tonight's episode. There has been a couple of cases where this contracts agreements, maybe misunderstanding around the rules, the situation has caused some issues, most notably recently in Wallara. If you can, why don't you just give our listeners a bit of a sense of what's going on and what you think is the most likely kind of situational scenario that's led to this outcome?
Well, look, a question that we would get a couple of times a year on transactions when people are trying to understand how the whole Conveyancing Act works. And make no mistake, is that if you're selling your primary residence and you enter into an unconditional contract and you've just sold your house, you need to go and buy one in all probability, yeah?
Yep.
So your next question is, hey, we've exchanged contracts. There's a sold sign out the front of my house, Mr. Real Estate Agent. What's the chances of this crashing?
Yeah.
It's a very reasonable question because I'm about to now go and upgrade and spend $2 million more. I want to make sure that the person I've just sold to is good for the money. That's a fair question, yeah?
Yeah.
So, look, I can only speak for my time in real estate, but I've seen two instances where the buyer has failed to perform at settlement and the contract has fallen over and the deposit's gone to the vendor and the purchaser is on the hook for the shortfall.
Yeah.
And you need to know that I won't give anyone legal advice tonight, but in short, when you exchange contracts with a 66W, you are saying, by virtue of those 500 pages or whatever it is that we've spoken about, that you're good for the money on the settlement period. And if you can't settle on time, there's penalty interest there on the whole purchase price, and that penalty interest is purposefully set 3 to 4% above the mortgage rate of the day.
Yep.
So there's no incentive or benefit for someone dragging it out because you'll be only paying higher than what a mortgage would cost you. If you fail to perform on settlement, the deposit after 14 days notice to complete has expired. The deposit is released from the agent's trust account and given to the vendor, and the vendor is free to sell that property to someone else.
Yeah. And the deposit is typically 10%.
The recoupable amount is 10%. In Sydney at the moment, I'd say 90% of transactions are done on 5%.
Yeah. Does that, just for clarification, Does that though, because most contracts still on the front page dictate that 10% is the exchange amount, does the final deposit that's forfeited, is that the agreed upon 5 typically, or would it be the full 10?
Look, there was a court case where the judge said, in short, to the vendor, you took 5% on exchange, that's all you're getting.
Yep.
And then agents and lawyers have come up with different versions of a clause that says the vendor accepts a 10% deposit in the following fashion: 5% exchange, and the other 5% when the property settles or the purchaser terminates the contract.
Yep.
Fails to complete the contract. That hasn't been tested to the best of my knowledge through the courts, but every conveyancer, lawyer, real estate agent runs on that clause.
Yeah.
Let's move the conversation forward. This is what people don't understand about open-ended damages in a contract of sale, Ciaran, is they just think I've put 5% deposit down. So last year we had a client who had purchased before they sold, and their sale wasn't quite hitting the mark they wanted to, and they just said to me, look, this is getting a bit stressful. We think we're just going to dump the 5% on the purchase and forget about this. And I had to say, look, it's not for me to give you legal advice, but you need to know that you're completely on the hook for any shortfall that the vendor you're bought off suffers as a result of you pulling out and them having to resell.
Yeah, right. So if they then get a lower price, for example, or there's some other cost that they incur as a result, then you're liable for both.
Both.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And can be incredibly damaging.
Yeah. So the vendor who you've reneged on can end up in front.
Yep.
They can end up with a better arrangement and don't need to refund the purchaser that reneges. But the vendor has open-ended damages for any losses occurred. They can pursue that buyer.
Yeah, wow.
And in this day and age, where high-profile people, like our example here is of a physiotherapist in Wallara who sold her home for $10.6 million, and the timing couldn't have been better when she sold it. It doubled her purchase price of a few years earlier, according to the Herald article, and coincided with the high point of a Sydney property boom. If only the buyer hadn't have pulled out of the deal. Not only did the private lending specialist, who was the buyer, fail to complete the purchase, but she hadn't paid the full 10%, leaving the original vendor without the requisite $1.06 million to show for it. So open-ended damages, and unsurprisingly, they went to court over that.
So I guess my question there is, who's responsible? Obviously, the buyer's responsible to pay the deposit, right? But who's responsible in this kind of scenario where the deposit isn't fully captured?
Oh, the real estate agent. I wouldn't have wanted to be the real estate agent on this one. He did not tell, let me just look at the article again, but he did not tell, here we go here. But behind the scenes, this is from the Herald article, but behind the scenes, the $1.06 million deposit owed on the exchange was fast becoming a matter of contention, giving claims about the purchaser's first cheque bounced, and the sale was later secured by a bank transfer of $100,000. That equates to less than 1% of the purchase price. The vendor claimed that she only became aware the buyer had paid a fraction of the deposit 6 weeks after the deal was due to settle, by which time they had already given the purchasers more time to find finance to fund the purchase, and the property market had started a downward trajectory. The vendor further claims the agent was on a 1.1% commission, but that he reduced that by $16,000 after he broke the non-disclosure agreement by emailing his database with the bullish sale price. The commission was never paid. So the real estate agent was emailing his database saying, I've achieved this record price, and he'd taken a deposit check that had bounced and managed to get $100,000 in a surety from the buyer, but $100,000 over $10.06 million, clearly not very much.
No, well, it's 0.94% of the purchase price, which is not close to 10%.
Yeah.
To the best of my mathing, anyway.
Yeah, so I'll have to believe you on those numbers, which I do. But yes, that's a disastrous outcome. And now that purchaser, I don't know where this is all going, and I won't stay abreast of it because I've got better things to do. But that vendor can pursue that purchaser and probably bankrupt them for the funds that she's ultimately lost. The property was relisted for $9 million.
So I was gonna ask that question. Given that she's down 900,000 on the initial deposit, and potentially could lose 1.6, let's say, for argument's sake, $2 million on the next sale price, given the property market has changed trajectory from where it was. Are you saying then that with the right process in place and legal pressure and whatever, she can try and reclaim that entire, almost $3 million in difference, hypothetical numbers, but almost $3 million?
I don't think it'll blow out to be $3 million, but it's an open-ended damages. That's what's in these contracts.
Yeah,
people just think, just send a 120-page document along, and I'll just do a digital signature, and my lawyers give me the 66W saying I can exchange. Let's go for it. And if everything works out for you, that's fine. I think most people twigged to the danger of these contracts back in 2011 when Tony Collette pulled out of a property deal.
Yeah.
And got sued for $660,000 when they failed to complete.
Yeah. Who do you think? Final question for you then on this topic, and I'm not necessarily going to ask you to blame anyone, but in a scenario like this where we're talking a very high sale price, we're talking about a pretty high profile kind of sale, a transaction that people will watch. Who's at fault here? Obviously, the buyer's at fault, but how does someone get to
real estate agent?
How does someone get to $10.6 million purchase price without being vetted for finance? How does this happen?
Well, vetted for finance, they're according to the Herald,
they're a finance lender.
Yeah, a private lending specialist.
So they're going to borrow from themselves?
No less. It was a juicy article, but look, the real estate agent's role is to get the best price for the vendor, but it's also to protect the vendor.
Yeah.
And these are claims in this media article from the middle of 2025 that we're using as our case study today.
Yeah.
But it is saying the real estate agent sat on the fact that the deposit check bounced.
Yeah.
And he took $100,000 trying to get some skin in the game from the purchaser. He kept that all away from the vendor for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So I hope he's got good indemnity insurance because he's going to need it.
I was going to say, when he exchanged those contracts, he's saying as part of that, right, that I have the deposit in hand. Is that not one of the agreed components?
Look, there's a nuance here. They're not cleared funds.
Yep.
So if you think about an auction on Saturday, the purchaser wins the auction and hands over a personal cheque.
Yeah.
You can't bank that on Saturday
No,
at 2
that's
o'clock.
right. You're working on a bit of faith till Monday.
You're working on faith till Monday until the cheque clears, etc. So I think the real estate agent is, really old school Thai lawyers, and I hope I don't meet too many more of them. God love them. Won't allow us to exchange until we confirm we have cleared funds.
Yeah.
So they don't want to hear that we've got a cheque. They want a receipt saying it's cleared funds in the trust account.
Yeah.
Where the agent in this example here, according to the Herald, has held onto a cheque. The cheque has bounced. He's told no one. He's emailed his database saying, aren't I a superstar? The whole time he's scrambling, trying to get a 10% deposit out of the buyer. She flicks him 100, trying to appease him, saying, see, I am serious. And it turned into a train wreck down the track. And, he didn't get his commission. He's got he's got a lot of bad publicity. He was named and shamed in this article. If it's incorrect, he can sue the journalist, I guess, and the publication. I haven't heard of that occurring. So there was no winners out of this.
No, not at all. I know you've got better things to do, but I'm certainly going to just keep my nose in the air for this one because I am intrigued how this plays out. And it certainly is a cautionary tale for anyone out there who is thinking of, either exchanging without intention or without the funds in hand. It's a dangerous game, that's for sure.
I think most people exchange with intention. You'd have to be close to a raving lunatic to exchange without intention.
Yeah.
But to exchange without certainty of funds, I reckon more people than you'd think.
I have seen this though.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
the amount of times people ask for a cooling off and then you call them and say, hey, how are you progressing with whatever it might be? And they say, oh yeah, look, I'm pretty close to getting approved for finance.
Yeah.
It's alarm bells always ringing. What do you mean?
Yeah.
You know.
And the ones that we feel most sorry for is change of circumstances post exchange.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which does happen.
Job losses.
Deaths sometimes. Like there's all kinds of things going on.
I think if one of the parties directly on the contract passes, the contract is rescinded without penalty.
Correct. Typically.
Yeah. But yes, things do happen, and the longer the settlement, the broader the window for a change in circumstance.
Yeah. Well, you carry that risk forward, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's why vendors come in to me all the time. Ciaran, I had one late last year where someone offered a really, really high price on a property, but he wanted 6 months plus to settle because he needed to sell an investment property who knows where. And I said to the owner, look, just be very careful here. Be very careful. I don't like the smell of this. I said, it's up to you, but my job is not just to sell the property and get the highest price. It's to protect you.
Yeah.
And I said, I just don't like you being waiting around.
A safety net for someone.
A safety net for someone where they've wrapped you up in a lengthy contract with a 5% deposit, which is, it was a lawyer they were negotiating with. They've got tricks and ways of disappearing and smokes and mirrors and extending things and pushing them out and take me to court for the rest. I said, I don't like you being in this contract, and it's all being funded by the sale of a property that's going to go on the market in a few months' time, and you need the money now, and you're waiting 6 months for this, this premium. It was a couple of hundred. Ultimately, the property sold. They didn't feel comfortable in exchanging either, and the property sold for less to someone that settled a lot sooner and just gave them certainty, and they settled well before Christmas.
Yeah.
Where if we'd have gone with the original deal, yes, we could say we got a higher figure, as our friend in Wallara did here, but we'd be sweating on the buyer completing.
Well, our friend in Wallara got a higher figure but got nothing. So,
Correct,
I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't mean anything till everything's signed and done and the keys are handed over and it's a finished deal.
And these are all of the things that need to be discussed at the point of sale, whether you are buying or selling.
That's true. Really great topic tonight, Peter. I certainly will be keeping my eyes peeled for any updates in that case, and I'll be sure to update our listeners into the future.
Okay, we'll hold you to that.
Yeah, good. As always, though, my friend, thanks for coming in and thanks for talking with us today.
Good on you. Thanks, Ciaran.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks for everyone to listening to Current Market Insights. We look forward to speaking with you next time.
Thanks for joining us on